Well, several weeks ago, a local funeral home contacted me and asked me if I would be available to help with a funeral service of a family that had little to no connection to a church in the area. And as a minister, it's always been my practice that wherever I live and whatever community I'm a part of, that I try to say yes whenever possible to these kind of requests. Because I feel very strongly that it's a matter of showing God's love to people, to ensure that every carefully created person receives a beautiful burial and is honored at their death. And it's created some really interesting scenarios for me. I've had some adventures where it's been me and one person at a graveside. I've had all kinds of different family setups and dynamics that I've got to try to understand and navigate, and connections that I have been made with folks that I never would have made connections with otherwise. So this time when they called, I said yes. And per usual, when I met with the family to talk about the service, I took their religious temperature. I usually do this because, you know, when we're burying someone, we want to be sure that we're creating a space where everyone who is there feels as comfortable as possible. So I try to take their religious temperature and just see where we're at with things. And this family in particular identified themselves as, you know, people who believe that there's a higher power of some sort, but they said, you know, we're not really into the whole Jesus thing. Okay, I got it, we can do this. So I said, you know, what do you envision including as a part of this service? And this is always a place where families stumble a little bit, naturally, right? How do you go about summarizing a life in a 30, 45-minute service? How do you summarize a life? How do you remember all the beautiful things, but be honest about the hard things? How do you include beliefs about, you know, afterlife and death, and provide comfort, but also closure, all at the same time? And so often, this question is one that we end up wrestling with together. But after a moment, a sister of the deceased, you know, mentioned, oh, there's this song that I think would be nice to include. And then someone else said, well, I think, you know, so-and-so might be willing to say something. And then another family member piped up and said, well, of course we have to have Psalm 23 read. Of course, Psalm 23. As a pastor, I've never been part of a funeral that didn't have Psalm 23 as part of the service. No matter their relationship with the church or connection to Jesus or lack thereof, they always want Psalm 23 read. Right? I mean, I would. It's reassuring. It offers this picture of life's journey where we don't have to be alone, where we don't need to be afraid, where we have an opportunity for comfort and protection. So Psalm 23 it is. And I don't imagine there is a more well-known psalm in the Bible besides Psalm 23. It is etched in the hearts and minds of people all over the world in all walks of life. It's interesting, though, because, you know, our culture and the world has changed quite a bit from the era thousands of years ago when the psalmist composed these words and put them together. I mean, very few of us have ever met a shepherd. I don't know. Yeah, okay, Sandy, a couple people, yeah. I love it. Very few of us have met a real shepherd. Most of us don't have regular contact with sheep. Wool sweaters and lamb chops don't count. So most of us, we live in a different kind of world. Most of us do. A fast-paced one. Now, it's all about smartphones and emails, and there's concrete roads and big buildings, and we have, our lives are filled with crowds and complicated problems and issues facing the world. And frankly, we have more experience with police officers directing traffic than we have had with sheep being directed by a shepherd. Yet we love Psalm 23. We love this psalm. This talk about shepherds and sheeps. Sheeps? See, I don't even know. But we hear these words and they just connect with us in a way. When we want to hear the truest and best words about the sum of experience of life on earth, we go to Psalm 23. To the description of the hillsides of Palestine 3,000 years ago is where we choose to center ourselves. So wouldn't you know, one thing that hasn't changed since 3,000 years ago to now is that the landscapes described by the psalmist that they encounter in their life are not any different than we experience now. The testimony about this one pilgrim and what they've seen and experienced in life is the same variety pack of encounters that you and I have. There's green pastures. We have dark valleys and still waters, company of enemies. Our cups overflow gloriously, and then we encounter the shadow of death. Life remains the ultimate shape shifter. It remains the ultimate shape shifter. And we've encountered several of these landscapes together in Lent so far. We have our garden. We encountered the garden. We were on a mountaintop together. Last week we were in the rocky desert, and here we are in the green pasture. And last week in particular, we were talking about how God is present in the midst of our anxious grumbling. God is present in the midst of our anxious grumbling. And today, these words of the psalm talking about green pastures and the shepherd invite us to explore that truth in a deeper way. What does it mean that God is present? What does it mean that God is present? And last week it meant that God listens, God hears. This week we hear that God is present, the Lord is our shepherd. What I would love to be able to do today is to stand up here and tell you that because we have the Lord as our shepherd, all we will ever walk through is green pastures. That is what I would love to be able to offer. That still waters and flowers and butterflies and sunshine and joy and peace and serenity can be ours because we are in a relationship with Jesus. Alas, and you don't need me to tell you this, but there's darkness. We can have a connection with God, we can be connected with Jesus, and yea, we will still walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Yea, though we walk through the unsettling times of midlife discontent. Yea, though I don't know how long I have left in this world. Yea, though I am afraid that love just won't be enough. Yea, though finances are tight and I'm not sure where the money will come from. Yea, though I know I need help, but can't bring myself to ask for it. Yea, though my fear stops me from moving forward. Yea, though we walk through the valleys of the shadow of death. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thou art with me. What we eavesdrop on today is the psalmist working out his relationship with God, doing his best to sort out these seeming contradictions of human experience. On the one hand, there's these dark valleys that we're walking through. On the other, God's comforting staff. On the one hand, there's enemies, and on the other, a meal in God's presence. There's green pastures and still waters, but across those lapping waves is death. And so we experience the psalmist trying to figure out, how does this all work together? How does this fit? What does it all mean? And as the psalmist sifts through these different landscapes of experiences, there is one thing that is constant through all of it: the presence of God. The presence of God. The Lord is his shepherd, and the psalmist expresses a change because of God's presence. The Lord is our shepherd, and we are changed because we have received the gift of God's presence. When a small child gets an owie, and they trip and they skin their knee, or they bump their elbow on the car door, or they stub a toe, when this happens, there is a simple routine that is followed. The child gets hurt. She runs to mommy. Mommy kisses the owie. And then the little one runs off to play like nothing ever happened. A loving kiss brings a healing of sorts in that moment. Did the skinned knee go away with a kiss? No, exactly, Kit James. It did not. Did the bruise from bumping the elbow go anywhere? No. Thank you. I was waiting. No. The owie is still there. The owie is still there, but the offering of love that comes in the form of presence and caring in that moment from the parent makes all the difference. It's like that for us. The owie isn't going away. But we have the presence of God in the shadows of these darkness, and suddenly when we understand that, the darkness loses some of its power. The owie loses some of its sting, because we know that God is present with us. Now, of course, I would I love that God just takes away all the darkness, that darkness would lose all of its power completely, 100%, and be replaced with the peaceful tranquility of divine glory. Yeah. Get out of the drudge of heaven life, or get out of the drudge of human life card. Yes, please. Sign me up. Get out of jail free. I'll take 2 cards. And that day will come. There will come a day when death and pain and suffering and all of that junk will be wiped off the face of the earth for good. But until then, we trust that the Lord is our shepherd. Now, when I think of a shepherd, my view is has been sentimentalized. We understand, again, because we're a little removed from this idea of a shepherd. So, when I first think of a shepherd, I think of like a young man sitting on a rock with a harp, right? Like dressed in white with a little harp and maybe a small stick by their side. And there's a group of like 5 fluffy, cute little sheep gathered around the rock, listening intently. But that's not exactly what shepherds were like 3,000 years ago. Shepherds, well, okay, who is like, in your mind, try to think of like the biggest, toughest, most rugged, like, dude you can think of. I don't know, Rocky, or like the Hulk, a sumo wrestler, like whatever image you have in your mind, like the biggest, most rugged dude ever, that is a little more like a shepherd was back in Palestine when this was being written. Shepherds were men who worked outside 24/7. Like they were out in the cold and the rain, and they weren't shaving every morning and taking a bath and clipping their toenails. These guys were living out in the wilderness, and they were living with their animals. Imagine the smell. They were hanging out with the animals. They were with the sheep, 24 hours a day, because if they left the sheep alone, well, sheep are helpless animals, so they can't be left unattended. They're constantly in search of food and water for their sheep, and wild animals are lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce on their precious animals for dinner at any moment, which is why they carried a big stick, not a little like twiggy branch thing that fit in their belt, a big stick that they would use, because when predators would come after their sheep, they'd whack them with the stick to keep them away. So it had to be, a nice hefty stick. And they had a staff too, right? And the staff was a big, long stick with a hook on the end that they used to reach and pull the sheep back into the herd when they started to wander away. It wasn't like a cute little, accessory. They needed the staff, they needed the rod to keep their sheep out of danger. And so when you hear the Lord is your shepherd, how has your image changed now? The Lord is your shepherd. The Lord has got your back 24/7. The Lord is constantly seeking your health and well-being. Constantly, never resting. The Lord covers you when storms come, so you don't get completely decimated in the storm's path. The Lord will carry you on his back when you're unable to walk yourself. And yes, the Lord will even resort to using that big stick and the hook when he needs to make sure you are protected and safe in the fold. And we can trust that this is all true, even if we can't feel it, if we can't see it, if we can't connect with it in our heart or our mind or our soul, we can still trust that it is true, because the psalmist tells us right here that it happened, that he experienced it. The psalmist knew it. The psalmist lived it, and the psalmist wants to make sure that you and I don't forget that whatever landscape we find ourselves wandering through today, we can trust that the Lord is our shepherd, who guides us in our wandering, who sustains us in the dark places, who remains connected to us in all of the days of our life. My mom and sister and I went to Israel about 6 years ago now. And when we were in Israel, we saw some real shepherds. They were Bedouins. And we were touring by their watering hole, where they would bring their flocks of sheep close to sunset to get, nourished for the night and have a drink of water. And as we passed, you could see one shepherd walk up with his big herd, and they all, went right for the water. And then the other shepherd walked up, and his sheep mixed in with the other herd, all, fighting for the water, of course. And then a third one came, and now we had 3 flocks of sheep, all just wandering around. You didn't know whose sheep was whose. There were no tags on the ears. There was no colors. There was no collars. There was nothing. And then a 4th guy comes up and wanders over, and now all they're all just like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sheep. The 4 shepherds are over standing together, chit-chatting. Like, I don't know what they were talking about, but they were just hanging out, spilling the shepherd tea, whatever. And I was so confused and concerned. Like, how do they know whose sheep is whose? This is chaos. Is this safe? And why aren't the shepherds paying any attention to these sheep? And so then, as it became time to go, and one shepherd made his little call on his whistle thing. I'm sure there's a technical name for it. I don't know it. But he blew his whistle, and instantly just sheep went right over to the shepherd, and off they walked. He didn't count them. He didn't, nothing. He just, to make sure they were his. But they seemed to know, right? Like, this was my shepherd. And then the next one made a call with his voice. And a whole bunch more sheep, they all lined up behind their shepherd, and off they went. And so it continued until there were no sheep left at the watering hole. And it was quite something to watch. No fences, like I said, no ear tags, no territorial, any kind of anything. Just the sharing of this water and land together. And the sheep knew their shepherd's call. The sheep knew the shepherd's voice. And they trusted that when they heard that call or that voice, they would follow and that their needs would be met. The sheep separated themselves from the mixed up situation because they knew the voice of the shepherd that they had come to trust. Jesus is our shepherd, and Jesus calls us with his voice, and we know it, and we've heard it, and we can trust it. And so, friends, I hope this week, when Jesus calls to you, that you will trust that the Lord is your shepherd, and you are part of his flock. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.